My name is Amelia, and I never imagined my life would collapse in a single night. One moment I was walking into what I thought was my safe home. The next moment I was accused of violence I never committed. That night, I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, watching the teenager I had raised for 7 years clutch his arm with a fake bruise and call his father with trembling tears that were nothing but an act. "Dad," she hit me. "I am scared. Please come home now." Those words echoed in my ears like a death sentence. My husband, Mark, rushed home 20 minutes later, his eyes burning with fury, his heart already convinced by the lies spilling from his son's mouth. The boy I had cooked for, tutored in math, and cheered for at every football game, had become the very person who would rip my marriage apart with a single phone call. Mark did not ask questions. He did not pause to consider 7 years of devotion. He looked at the bruise Jake had pressed into his own skin and said in a voice colder than I had ever heard, "Pack a bag. You are leaving tonight." I remember my hands shaking so violently I could barely zip my suitcase. My vision blurred with tears, yet in the hallway I caught sight of Jake's expression. Not fear, not pain, a smirk, a chilling glimpse of satisfaction at having outplayed me. That image burned itself into my memory, more painful than the rejection of my husband. 7 years of my life reduced to nothing in a single evening. I stumbled out into the night, the air biting against my wet cheeks. Every step away from that house felt like a betrayal of the woman I once believed I was. I thought I had built a family. I thought I had earned love through patience, kindness, and sacrifice. Instead, I had been cast out like a stranger, punished for a crime I never committed. That is where my story begins. But before I tell you how I went from a devoted wife and stepmother to a woman forced out of her own home in just 3 weeks, I need you to stay with me. This is not only a story about betrayal, it is a story about reclaiming freedom when everyone has written you off. And if you have ever been in a place where lies crushed your truth, you will understand why I had to fight back. Because being thrown out was not the end. It was only the beginning. When I look back now, it is almost impossible to reconcile that night with the way our story began. Mark and I did not meet in some bar or through a dating app. We met in a conference hall packed with professionals, all focused on strategy and numbers. I was standing at the podium in Chicago, presenting a panel on digital marketing, explaining how to transform customer engagement with bold but practical ideas. My slides glowed on the big screen, and my voice carried across rows of attentive faces. In the middle of that sea of strangers, one man's eyes caught mine. Mark. He asked sharp questions, thoughtful ones that cut to the core of my arguments. His confidence radiated, and when he smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkled in a way that felt disarming. After the session he approached me. Not with some tired pickup line, but with a business card, and a compliment about my approach to strategy. It was professional, respectful, and intriguing. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into weekend trips. Within 6 months, we were inseparable. He had been divorced for a few years, raising his 11-year-old son Jake on his own. He was careful, almost protective, about introducing me. When he finally did, it was at Jake's favorite pizza place. I changed my outfit 3 times that night, finally settling on a blue sweater Mark had once said made my eyes brighter. Jake was quiet, cautious, watching his father for cues before answering my questions. I remember leaving that restaurant with my heart full of cautious hope. I told myself, if I was going to love Mark, I would also love his son. That was the package, and I embraced it. Over the next months, the walls between us thinned little by little. Jake eventually agreed to let me help him with a school project. We even shared movie nights where he laughed at my clumsy attempts to understand his video games. Those moments felt like the foundation of something real. 6 months after that first meeting, Mark proposed. We stood by Lake Michigan during a weekend getaway, the wind whipping around us, and he slipped a ring onto my finger. I said yes with tears in my eyes, believing I had found the family I always dreamed of. Our wedding was beautiful. 100 guests filled the room with music and joy. Jake stood proudly as Mark's best man. His speech was polite, even welcoming, and I thought the cracks of uncertainty had sealed. Moving into Mark's house felt like stepping into a shell waiting to be filled. The home was well maintained but cold, like a model on display. With his encouragement, I brought life into every corner. Soft lighting, warm colors, photos on the walls. I transformed his bachelor's place into a family home. I never touched Jake's room without his permission. I wanted him to feel safe, respected, not invaded. And for a while, I thought it was working. Mark noticed my efforts. At night after Jake went to bed, he would hold me close and whisper, "Thank you for being patient, for being kind, for loving his son." Those words mattered more than he knew. They validated the sacrifices, the energy, the constant balancing act of being a stepmother. Back then, I believed in the story we were building. I believed that if I poured enough love into the cracks, the walls of distrust would eventually crumble. I believed that patience could heal old wounds. But as you will see, love without trust is a castle built on sand. And the tide was already rising. Before I dive deeper, I want to pause here and ask you something. If you have ever fought to be accepted in a family that was not originally yours, or if you have ever been forced to prove your worth to people who doubted you from the start, let me know in the comments. Share your story, because these are battles no one should fight alone. And if you are connecting with what I am saying, hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next chapter. This story is far from over, and you will want to see how it unfolds. Because what looked like the beginning of a dream was, in truth, only the setup for a devastating fall. I threw myself into my new role with everything I had. Being a wife was one thing, but being a stepmother felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon. Every move mattered. Every word could tip the balance. I promised myself I would not replace Jake's mother, but I would be present, reliable, and steady. The first way I showed it was through the home. When I walked into that house for the first time as a newlywed, I saw walls painted in neutral tones, furniture functional but cold, and rooms that echoed with emptiness. It was a house, not a home. With Mark's blessing, I began transforming it. The living room glowed with warm lighting, inviting sectionals, and framed photos of us smiling on vacations. The kitchen became my favorite place, always scented with simmering sauces or fresh bread. I wanted Jake to feel comfort when he walked in after school, not the chill of a silent house. I kept my hands off his room, though. That space was sacred, I asked, gently, if he wanted me to help redecorate, but when he shrugged, I left it untouched. His room was his fortress, and I respected that boundary. Respect, I thought, would be the bridge between us. I tried to connect in small ways. I learned football rules just so I could cheer from the stands. I cooked his favorite meals and remembered the little details, like holding the onions on his burgers or adding extra cheese to his pasta. I even sat at the kitchen table for hours helping him with algebra, showing patience when he grew frustrated. On good days, he let me in. He would laugh during movie nights, even once asked for my help on a school project about marketing. That moment thrilled me. My expertise finally mattered to him. Christmas came, and I surprised him with a gaming laptop I had researched for weeks. The joy on his face that morning lit me up inside. For once, I felt like I had cracked the door to his heart. Mark saw it too. At night, he would wrap his arms around me, his voice thick with gratitude. "Thank you for loving him like your own," he whispered. Those moments made every sacrifice worthwhile. Yet, beneath the smiles I sensed shadows. There were glances from Jake when Mark was not looking, cool and sharp like a blade. Sometimes he muttered under his breath, dismissive comments I pretended not to hear. I told myself these were just teenage storms, passing moods. Sophia, my friend from work who was also a stepmother, warned me. "Teenagers can be manipulative," she said over lunch one day. "Don't ignore red flags." But I did. I chose hope over suspicion. I poured myself into the role, believing persistence would win. I believed if I just kept showing up, Jake would see me for who I was. A woman who loved him. A woman who loved his father. A woman trying desperately to knit a family out of broken pieces. For a while I convinced myself it was working. Our backyard became a place for summer barbecues. Mark's parents even praised the warmth I brought into the family. Barbara said, "It is so good to see my son happy again." Richard thanked me for creating stability for Jake. Their approval was oxygen to me, a sign that my efforts were finally visible. I dreamed of more. Mark and I talked about having children of our own. We promised to wait until Jake was older, until our foundation was stronger. I imagined Jake with a little brother or sister, thought maybe a new sibling could bind us together for life. But dreams can blind you. I mistook fragile politeness for progress. I misread tolerance as acceptance. The truth was simmering beneath the surface, growing darker every day, and I refused to see it. And that refusal would cost me everything. The years passed, and with each season that changed outside our windows, I believed we were growing stronger as a family. Yet what I did not realize was that beneath the surface, something was shifting. Slowly, silently, almost imperceptibly. Jake was no longer the shy 11-year-old I first met at that pizza place. He had grown into a tall, broad-shouldered teenager. With that came not only independence but also a sharper edge in his personality. At first, I told myself his mood swings were normal. He was navigating high school, friendships, and the confusing bridge between childhood and adulthood. But I began to notice patterns that were hard to ignore. Family dinners, once a steady anchor in our home, started to dissolve. Jake would text excuses, late practices, study groups, last-minute projects. His empty chair at the table became a regular sight. I tried to coax him back by making his favorite meals. One night, I cooked lasagna from scratch, layering the pasta with the sauce I knew he loved. He texted that he was at a friend's house working on a project. I smiled weakly at Mark across the table, pushing food around my plate, pretending not to feel the sting of rejection. Mark shrugged, saying, "That is high school for you." But I knew better. This wasn't just busy schedules. It was deliberate distance. I overheard Jake on the phone late at night, whispering when he realized I was near. I caught fragments. "She's always in my business." Once, he rolled his eyes at me when he thought I wasn't looking. And then came the small but unsettling incidents: my bracelet missing from the dresser, $40 vanishing from my wallet. I asked Mark about it, hoping for support, but he brushed it off. "You probably misplaced it," he said, his tone more dismissive than concerned. The unease inside me grew louder. I finally gathered the courage to bring it up one Saturday morning over coffee. "Mark, I'm worried about Jake. He avoids me. He barely speaks to me anymore." Mark leaned back in his chair, sighing. "Easter, he's 17. Teenagers need space. You're overthinking it." I wanted to argue, to explain that it was more than teenage rebellion, but I let it drop, swallowing the unease that clung to me like a shadow. Then came the grades. A notification popped up: Jake was failing chemistry. I walked into his room, gently offering to help him study. His reaction stunned me. He ripped off his headphones and snapped, "Did you seriously check my grades behind my back?" His face flushed with anger. "You're not my mother. Stop pretending you are." His words cut deep. When I told Mark, hoping he would understand, he dismissed it again. "He's stressed about college applications. Don't take it personally." But it was personal. Every action, every word, was aimed like an arrow at me. The next blow came when I found texts on Jake's phone about a party with alcohol and marijuana. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to betray his privacy, but I knew I had to say something. I approached Mark carefully, suggesting Jake needed more structure. Mark's eyes hardened. "Are you saying I don't know how to parent my own son?" His tone was cold, defensive, as if I had insulted him. I will never forget that moment. Because as I turned to leave, I saw Jake in the hallway, smirking. The satisfaction in his eyes chilled me to my bones. That smirk was not the look of a boy misunderstood. It was the look of someone who had just driven a wedge between two people and relished it. From that day on, the balance of our home tilted. The house I had filled with warmth no longer felt safe. It became a place of tension, of whispered lies and quiet hostility. And I began to realize that the battle was no longer about winning Jake's acceptance. It was about surviving in a house where I was being slowly erased. My 34th birthday should have been a celebration. I had spent weeks making reservations at a charming Italian restaurant, picturing the three of us sitting together, laughing, enjoying a rare evening of unity. But what happened that day told me everything I needed to know about my place in that house. The morning started beautifully. I walked downstairs to the smell of French toast and fresh berries. Mark had placed lilies on the table, my favorite flower. He kissed me, whispering, "Happy birthday, beautiful." For a brief moment, I felt cherished. Then I asked, "Where's Jake?" Mark hesitated before answering. He texted that he forgot about a study group. My heart sank. He had known about this day for weeks. "But he'll be at dinner, right?" I pressed. Mark set the plate in front of me, his face softening with guilt. "Actually, he has a project meeting tonight. It's important for his college applications." I tried to swallow my hurt, but the disappointment burned. He had chosen a project over me, on my birthday. That night, at the restaurant, the empty chair across from us mocked me. Mark tried to make up for it with extra attention, but the message was clear. When it came to choosing, I would always come second. On the drive home, I finally broke. "Mark, I feel like an outsider in my own family." My voice trembled. "This isn't just about tonight. It's a pattern. Jake excludes me, and you allow it." We argued for hours, circling the same points. Mark defended his son. I pleaded for recognition. By the end, apologies were exchanged, but something inside me had shifted. That night, I realized love without respect was a cage. After my birthday, Jake grew bolder. His lies were sharper, more calculated. Mark began questioning me in small but painful ways. "Did you yell at Jake yesterday about his laundry?" he asked one evening, eyes narrowing. I stared at him, stunned. That never happened. I was in meetings all day. But Jake's story had already planted a seed of doubt in his father's mind. My laptop, essential for work, appeared with water damage one afternoon. Only Jake had been home. He shrugged, denying everything. Soon after, Mark's parents, once warm toward me, grew distant. Barbara no longer asked for my opinion. Richard barely made eye contact. When I confronted Mark, he sighed. "Jake told them you've been hard on him. They're protective." That was the moment I felt my world tilt. Lies were spreading beyond our home. My reputation, my role as a wife, my place in the family, all of it was being dismantled by a 17-year-old who knew exactly how to twist the truth. I confided in Sophia, my friend at work, during a lunch break. Tears welled as I told her about the missing money, the false accusations, the way I was shrinking in my own home. She leaned forward, eyes serious. "Easter, this is deliberate. Jake is alienating you, and Mark is letting it happen. You need counseling, family therapy at the very least." That evening, I brought it up carefully. "Mark, I think we need help. Counseling could give us tools to fix this." His reaction was swift and dismissive. "We don't need a stranger telling us how to be a family. Jake's just being a teenager. You're taking it too personally." It felt like a door slamming in my face. Every attempt I made to salvage us was rejected. Every plea was met with defense of Jake. And in the silence that followed, I felt the walls of the home I had built closing in on me. And let me pause here to ask you something. If you were in my place, would you have walked away then? Or would you have stayed, still believing you could hold everything together? Tell me in the comments. Your perspective might help someone who feels trapped in the same cycle. At the time, I chose to stay. I still believed love and patience could fix anything, but I had no idea the storm waiting just around the corner. Because betrayal, once it takes root, always grows. The weeks after my birthday were like watching a slow-motion avalanche. Every day, small pieces of my world slid further out of my control. I told myself to stay calm, to be patient, to believe that Mark's love for me would outweigh Jake's hostility. But what I didn't realize was that Jake had already begun building a trap, and I was walking straight into it. It started with subtle lies, whispered conversations I overheard when I walked through the door. "She gets angry when you're not around, Dad," Jake said one evening, not realizing I was in the hallway. My stomach clenched. His voice was practiced, careful, designed to sound like concern. Mark didn't notice me. He just nodded, as if Jake's words were truth. Soon after, my work laptop turned up ruined. I had left it on my desk in perfect condition. When I came home, water stains ran across the keyboard. Jake claimed he had no idea what happened. Mark looked uncomfortable but didn't press. Another time, Mark confronted me. Jake says you yelled at him about laundry. I froze, shocked. That never happened. I was in meetings all day. But the doubt had already seeped in. I could see it in his eyes. My sanctuary became a prison. Even small chores like folding laundry or cooking dinner filled me with dread. What if Jake twisted it into another accusation? I was living under constant surveillance, not by cameras, but by the lies of a teenager who wanted me gone. Sophia noticed the toll. "You look exhausted," she said over lunch, her eyes full of concern. I broke down, telling her about the missing money, the false accusations, the cold stares from Mark's parents. She didn't sugarcoat it. "Easter, this is alienation. Jake is turning your husband against you, and Mark is letting it happen." Her words stung because they rang true. But I wasn't ready to give up. That night, I suggested therapy. "Mark, we need help. A professional could give us tools to navigate this." He didn't even let me finish. "We don't need therapy. This is just a rough patch," Jake stressed. "You're overreacting." His tone was clipped, defensive, final. The rejection crushed me, but worse, it confirmed that he was no longer on my side. My husband, the man who had once held me and thanked me for loving his son, was now my silent judge. Things escalated quickly after that. One afternoon, I discovered that my passport and financial documents had been moved. My bank account showed $500 missing. Only Mark had access. When I confronted him, his confusion seemed genuine, but his response was dismissive. "Maybe you forgot transferring it. You've been under stress." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My mind swirled. Was I losing my grip? Or was I being gaslit in my own home? Mark's parents grew colder. Barbara, once so welcoming, now spoke only to her son and grandson. Richard barely acknowledged me. When I asked Mark why, he shrugged. "Jake told them you criticize him constantly. They're just protective." It hit me like a physical blow. Jake wasn't just turning Mark against me, he was poisoning the entire family. My years of effort, the home I built, the love I poured into them, were being erased with whispers and lies. And the scariest part? I realized Jake wasn't fumbling through teenage rebellion. He was deliberate, calculated. Every lie was a chess move, pushing me closer to the edge of the board. I stayed, though. I told myself this was temporary, that Mark would wake up, that Jake would grow out of it. But deep down, a knot of dread tightened in my chest. Because when someone is willing to lie with a smile, the truth becomes a fragile thing. And my truth was about to shatter. The breaking point came on a night I will never forget. I had been away in Seattle for a 3-day business trip, meeting clients and finalizing a campaign. The meetings wrapped up early, so instead of staying the final night, I decided to surprise Mark by coming home a day ahead of schedule. I didn't text, thinking it would be a sweet moment, me walking through the door, maybe sharing takeout on the couch, laughing about how we missed each other. But when my taxi pulled up to the house at 6 in the evening, something felt wrong. The bass of music thumped through the walls. As I opened the door, the smell of alcohol and marijuana hit me before I even stepped inside. The living room was a scene straight out of a teen movie gone wrong. Jake and at least 10 other kids sprawled across the furniture. Empty bottles littered the coffee table. Red plastic cups were overturned, spilling sticky liquid onto the cream-colored rug I had bought just 2 months earlier. Potato chip bags, cigarette butts, and the reek of smoke turned my home into a battlefield. I froze in the doorway, my heart hammering. Nobody noticed me at first. Then one girl nudged Jake, who looked up, his face pale. His eyes widened with panic. He was clearly intoxicated, stumbling as he tried to stand. "What is going on here?" My voice cut through the music. The chatter fell silent, the tension sharp enough to slice. Jake fumbled with his phone and lowered the volume, muttering, "Dad's at a work dinner. He won't be home until late." I looked around at the chaos. My home, my sanctuary. Everyone who doesn't live here leave, now. There were groans, protests, but I marched to the sound system and shut it off. One by one the kids shuffled out, some glaring, some giggling nervously. When the door closed behind the last one, I turned to Jake. "What were you thinking? Alcohol? Drugs? In our house? Do you understand how serious this is?" He swayed, sneered, and muttered, "It's not a big deal. Everyone does it." "This is illegal, Jake," I snapped, gathering the bottles. "You and your friends could have been arrested. Do you want to destroy your future before it even starts?" "Leave it," he barked, his voice suddenly hostile. "I'll clean it up before Dad gets home. He doesn't need to know." I shook my head. "I won't lie to your father. He needs to know what happened." That was the moment everything changed. Jake's eyes hardened, his drunken slur replaced by a chilling clarity. He pulled out his phone, turned slightly away, and spoke in a trembling voice that didn't match his expression at all. "Dad, you need to come home right now," he said, tears laced into every syllable. "Easter's freaking out. She hit me. I don't know what to do." My breath caught. The bottle slipped from my hand and clattered against the floor. "Jake, what are you talking about? That's a lie." But he ignored me, continuing his act. "I'm scared, Dad. Please come home." Then he hung up, slipping the phone back into his pocket, a smug glint flashing in his eyes. For the first time, I saw him clearly. Not as a moody teenager, not as a boy resisting a stepmother, but as someone calculating, manipulative, dangerous. He leaned back against the counter, rubbing his arm deliberately against the edge, hard enough to leave a red mark that would bruise. "It's your word against mine," he whispered, almost taunting. "And Dad always believes me." In that moment, my world tilted on its axis. Everything I had worked for, all the years of patience, the sacrifices, the dreams of family, they were about to crumble, with one phone call and a single lie. "And here's where I need you to lean in. What would you have done if you were me? Confront him? Leave immediately? Or wait, knowing his father would walk in and choose a side? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear how you would have handled that moment, because it was the turning point that changed everything. I didn't know it then, but that night would be the night my marriage ended. Because when Mark opened the door 20 minutes later, fury in his eyes, I realized Jake wasn't just pulling strings. He was about to cut them. When Mark burst through the door, the look on his face sent a chill down my spine. He didn't ask questions. He didn't pause to take in the scene. His eyes darted straight to Jake, who was clutching his arm and breathing in ragged, shaky sobs. The bruise, the one I had seen him deliberately create, had already darkened into something ugly and convincing. "Dad!" Jake cried, stumbling into his father's arms. "She lost it!" She screamed and shoved me against the wall. I didn't know what to do. His voice trembled with perfect practiced fear. I stepped forward, my voice breaking. "That is not what happened, Mark. Please listen to me. Jake had a party here, alcohol, drugs, kids everywhere. I sent them home, and he made up this lie the moment I told him you needed to know." Mark's gaze flicked between us. For one brief second, I saw hesitation, maybe even reason. He scanned the room, the bottles, the spilled drinks, the mess. But Jake was ready. "It was just a couple of beers," he stammered, still in character. "I was asking them to leave when she came home early and went crazy. She's always hated me. You know that." Hated him? The word pierced me like a blade. After years of trying, of bending over backward to love him, that's what he spun into his father's ear. "Mark," I pleaded, tears stinging my eyes. "You know me. You know I would never lay a hand on him. Look at the evidence. Why would he call you, and not the police, if he was really in danger?" But Mark's eyes had already hardened. He wasn't hearing me. He wasn't weighing facts. He was staring at the bruise, at his trembling son, and making a choice. "Pack a bag," he said quietly, his voice like ice. The words knocked the air out of me. "What?" "I want you out of this house tonight." His jaw was set, unmovable. Mark, please, you can't believe this, I begged, my voice breaking. 7 years together and this is all it takes? A bruise you didn't even see happen? I know what I see, he snapped. My son is terrified of you. I won't take that risk. I looked past him at Jake. And there it was again, that smug glint, the victorious smirk flickering at the corners of his mouth. He knew. He had won. Tears streamed down my face as I stumbled upstairs, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip my suitcase. Every step felt like a funeral march, the end of the life I had fought so hard to build. I grabbed clothes, my toothbrush, a framed picture from our trip to Napa that I couldn't bear to leave behind. When I came downstairs, Mark stood in the kitchen, arms crossed. He didn't move as I picked up my purse and charger. I never thought you'd choose to believe such an obvious lie, I whispered, meeting his eyes one last time. No bruise in the world changes who I am. His expression didn't waver. This was my house before you. I never thought you'd hurt my son. I guess we were both wrong. I turned to Jake. His father didn't see it, but I did. That tiny, satisfied smirk as I opened the door. The final confirmation that every step of this had been deliberate. Driving to Sophia's that night, I called Mark again and again. My texts flooded his phone. None were answered, none even read. He had shut me out completely. When I walked into Sophia's apartment, I collapsed into her arms, sobbing harder than I ever had in my life. Whatever happened, we'll figure it out, she promised. But in that moment, I didn't believe her. My home, my husband, my family, everything had been ripped away in the span of one lie and 20 minutes. What I didn't know yet was that being forced out wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a fight I never expected to wage. The first night at Sophia's apartment was the longest of my life. I lay on the guest bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment in my mind. Jake's smirk. Mark's cold voice. The slam of the door behind me. It was as if my entire identity had been erased in an instant. I wasn't a wife anymore. I wasn't a stepmother. I was an intruder who had been cast out of her own life. But when the sun rose, something inside me shifted. The shock that had paralyzed me began to harden into resolve. I could not allow myself to be destroyed by a 17-year-old's lies or a husband's blind loyalty. Sophia handed me a cup of coffee and said, "You need legal advice. This isn't just a rough patch. He threw you out based on nothing but a story." Her words cut through the fog. She was right. I needed to protect myself. That afternoon, she connected me with her cousin, Patricia Williams, one of the city's most respected divorce attorneys. Walking into Patricia's sleek office, my stomach churned. The word divorce still felt foreign, like betrayal. But Patricia's clear, steady voice changed everything. "Based on what you've told me," she said, her eyes sharp, "your husband has already shown where his loyalties lie. The question now isn't whether you can fix this marriage. It's how you can protect yourself." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of power return. Patricia instructed me to document everything, every lie, every incident, every financial detail. I spent hours creating a timeline, writing until my hand cramped, filling page after page with the reality Mark had refused to see. When I checked our online accounts, Patricia's warning proved true. Mark had already moved $15,000 from our joint savings into his personal account the morning after he kicked me out. Betrayal burned in my chest, but it also steeled me. If he wanted to play dirty, I would not sit quietly and let him ruin me. Evidence began to stack in my favor. Our neighbors, the Johnsons, had security cameras that caught Jake's friends leaving our house that night, laughing, stumbling, clearly intoxicated, and most importantly, unharmed. The timestamp proved I wasn't alone with Jake long enough to do what he claimed. Even better, Patricia secured statements from 2 of those friends. They confirmed I had simply told everyone to leave and hadn't laid a hand on Jake. Then came the smoking gun, a screenshot from a private social media group forwarded to me by one of Jake's so-called friends. In it, Jake bragged, "Finally got the stepmom out. Dad fell for it." Hook, line, and sinker. When I read those words, my hands shook, not from fear this time, but from anger so sharp it felt cleansing. He had exposed himself. His arrogance would be his undoing. Through it all, Mark remained silent. My texts went unanswered. My calls rolled straight to voicemail. The only communication came through Patricia, who received a curt email. I could collect more of my belongings on Saturday afternoon while he and Jake were out. 3 weeks passed like that. My world reduced to a borrowed bedroom, legal documents, and the quiet determination to fight for myself. My sister Laurel flew in from Portland, wrapping me in the kind of unconditional love I had forgotten existed. With her and Sophia at my side, I began to rebuild not just a case, but myself. Returning to that house with Laurel to gather my things was surreal. My wedding photos still hung on the walls. The roses I had planted bloomed in the garden outside. But it wasn't mine anymore, not really. As I packed, Laurel sat beside me on the bed, squeezing my hand. "This isn't the end of your story," she whispered. "It's just the end of a chapter. The next one will be better." Her words planted something inside me. Hope. And let me ask you something here. If you were standing in my shoes, forced out, betrayed, humiliated, would you fight back, or would you walk away and rebuild from scratch? Tell me in the comments. I truly want to know how you would have chosen. Because I decided not to surrender. I decided to turn my pain into power. By the 3rd week of exile, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me in the mirror. Her eyes were swollen from nights of crying. Her shoulders slumped beneath the invisible weight of betrayal. But beneath that broken shell, something was stirring. A spark that refused to be extinguished. It began with a haircut. One morning, I walked into a salon and told the stylist to cut it all off. My long hair, the one Mark used to say made me look softer, fell in heavy strands to the floor. In its place was a sleek bob, sharp, modern, and liberating. I remember staring at myself afterward and whispering, "You're not his anymore, you're yours." I joined a kickboxing class the following week. Every punch against the bag felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Each strike was a release, anger, fear, humiliation, all expelled with every movement. The instructor shouted encouragements, but I hardly needed them. For the first time in months, my body felt strong, capable, unafraid. Clothes came next. I bought tailored dresses, bold colors, outfits that reflected me, not the muted version I had become in Mark's house. I realized how often I had dressed to keep the peace, to fit into his narrative of what a wife should look like. Now, every zipper pulled up, every new pair of heels slipped on, felt like a declaration. I am not invisible. But transformation wasn't just on the outside. I began reconnecting with old friends I had let slip away during my marriage. At first I felt nervous would they judge me for disappearing, for prioritizing a man who ultimately discarded me. But to my surprise, they welcomed me back with open arms. Dinners, coffee dates, long phone calls, my circle grew wider, stronger, more vibrant. These women didn't see me as Mark's wife or Jake's stepmother. They saw me. Sophia and Laurel became my daily anchors. Sophia kept reminding me, healing is not linear. Some days you'll feel like you've conquered the world, and the next you'll fall apart. Both are okay. Laurel, meanwhile, brought laughter into my darkest moments. She forced me out of bed, dragged me to farmers' markets, and filled my fridge with fresh food, when all I wanted was takeout and wine. Then came the call. Mark's name lit up my phone exactly 3 weeks after he had told me to pack my bag and leave. My pulse spiked. Part of me wanted to ignore it. But curiosity, and maybe a flicker of hope made me answer. "Easter." His voice was smooth, almost casual. "I think it's time we talked. About what happened. About us. Maybe it's time you came home." The audacity nearly stole my words. He expected me to be waiting, to be grateful, to beg. Instead, I kept my voice calm, almost detached. "Yes, we should talk tomorrow, 1 o'clock. La Maison downtown." Relief spilled through his tone. "Perfect. I'll see you then." The second I hung up, I called Patricia. "He wants me to come back," I said. "He thinks I'll apologize." Patricia's laugh was low and satisfied. "Perfect. He won't see what's coming. Bring the papers tomorrow." That night, I couldn't sleep. I rehearsed every word I would say, every piece of evidence I would present. For weeks I had been the accused, the outcast. Tomorrow, I would be the one in control. Laurel helped me choose my outfit, a navy dress, sleek and powerful, not romantic. As she zipped it up, she squeezed my shoulders. Remember who you are, not who he thought you were. The next day, with Patricia's manila envelope tucked firmly in my purse, I walked into La Maison. The restaurant was buzzing with the lunch crowd. I had chosen it deliberately. Mark always said it was too pretentious. But I loved it. This was my space, my choice. A symbolic start to reclaiming my narrative. As I sat at the corner table waiting for him, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time since that night, I wasn't scared. I wasn't broken. I was ready. Because tomorrow wasn't about saving a marriage. It was about ending it on my terms. Mark arrived at La Maison at exactly 1 o'clock. Punctuality had always been his signature, a reflection of his control and discipline. As he walked toward me, I took a moment to really see him. His posture was still confident, but his shoulders carried a slump I had never noticed before. There were new lines around his eyes, a heaviness that had not been there 3 weeks earlier. He looked diminished. A part of me, the part that had once loved him unconditionally, felt a flicker of pity. But then I remembered the coldness in his voice when he told me to pack a bag. That memory steeled me. "Easter," he said, leaning as if to kiss my cheek before hesitating. Instead, he slid into the chair across from me. His eyes scanned me from head to toe. "You look different, good different." "Thank you," I replied evenly, not returning the compliment. My tone was polite, but distant. The way you speak to someone who used to matter, but no longer defines your world. We ordered drinks, he a scotch, me sparkling water with lime. He leaned forward, his expression serious, but his words almost rehearsed. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about our marriage. Family is important, and I think we owe it to ourselves to try to work through this." I let his words hang between us before replying. "I've been thinking too, about loyalty, about trust, about what really makes a marriage work." His face softened with relief. "Exactly. These are challenging times. With a teenager in the house, it takes patience and understanding from everyone." "No, Mark," I said firmly, my voice calm but unyielding. "What it takes is trust. And you showed me how much trust you had when you chose to believe Jake's lies without even questioning me." His expression darkened. "Easter, I saw the bruise with my own eyes. What was I supposed to think?" "You were supposed to think that your wife of 7 years, who has never once shown violence, might be telling the truth. You were supposed to consider that your 17-year-old son, who has been openly hostile toward me for months, might have fabricated it." He blinked, startled by my conviction. For the first time, he didn't have a ready answer. I reached into my purse and placed the manila envelope on the table. His eyes widened slightly. "What's this?" "I'm filing for divorce." He laughed, short and bitter, as if I had made a joke. "You can't be serious. This is an overreaction to a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "You threw me out of my home based on a lie. You ignored my calls for 3 weeks. You moved $15,000 out of our joint account the morning after you kicked me out. That isn't a misunderstanding, Mark. That's betrayal." He stiffened but said nothing. I slid my phone across the table. On the screen was the Johnsons' security footage, showing Jake's friends leaving the house drunk but unharmed. Then the screenshot of Jake's bragging post. "Finally got the stepmom out. Dad fell for it. Hook, line, and sinker." Finally the written statements from Jake's friends, confirming that I hadn't touched him. Mark's face paled as he scrolled. "This could be taken out of context," he muttered, but the conviction in his voice was gone. "Out of context?" I leaned forward. "Or exactly what it looks like?" "Your son manipulated you, and you let him." His phone buzzed on the table. Jake's name flashed on the screen, call after call. He ignored it at first, then finally answered, keeping his voice low. Even across the table I could hear Jake's panicked tone. "She has evidence? What post? Dad, You can't believe her. Mark's face drained of color. I'll be home soon, he said quickly, hanging up. When he looked back at me, his eyes were clouded with something I hadn't seen before. Fear. He knows, doesn't he? About the evidence? Yes, I said simply. The truth has a way of coming out. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw it sink in. The weight of his choices, the enormity of his mistake. His voice was quiet, almost broken. I made a terrible mistake. Yes, I agreed, my tone steady. And now we both live with the consequences. Mark's hands hovered over the envelope like it was a venomous snake. He didn't open it. He just stared, his jaw tight, his breathing uneven. You already have a lawyer? He asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and desperation. I had a lawyer the day after you told me to leave, I replied evenly. Because unlike you, I don't make life-altering decisions in the heat of the moment. I protect myself. His phone buzzed again, this time vibrating violently across the table. Jake's name glowed on the screen. Mark hesitated, then pressed decline, silencing it. I watched him closely, noticing the cracks forming in his facade. His son's lies were colliding head-on with evidence he could no longer ignore. Easter, please, he said finally, his voice softer. We can fix this. Family counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. Now that I see the truth, we can start over. Now? I asked, my tone sharp. Why not 3 weeks ago? Why not when I begged you to listen, to see what was happening under your own roof? You didn't just fail me, Mark. You discarded me. You let him erase me from my own life. That isn't something counseling will fix. His eyes filled with a regret so raw it almost startled me. But I didn't flinch. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. The papers outline fair terms. I've documented every financial contribution I made, the kitchen renovation I paid for, the furniture I bought, the improvements I funded with my inheritance. Patricia has calculated a division that reflects my work and sacrifice. It's reasonable, and you know it. Mark swallowed hard, but he didn't reach for the envelope. Instead, he whispered, Is there really no chance? Not even a small one? No, I said firmly, though my voice carried no malice. That ended the night you told me to pack a bag. Some things cannot be undone. His phone buzzed yet again. This time, the urgency in Jake's repeated calls seemed to rattle him. Mark sighed and answered. I could hear Jake's frantic voice even from across the table. She's lying, Dad. She faked everything. Don't believe her. Please don't let her trick you. Mark's shoulders slumped as he listened. His eyes flicked to mine, and for the first time, I saw the veil lifting. Jake, stop, he muttered into the phone. We'll talk later. When he hung up, his face was pale. He whispered. He knows I've seen the evidence. Yes, I said, steady and calm. And that's why he's panicking, because the truth is unraveling. For a long moment, silence filled the space between us. Mark looked down at the untouched scotch, then back at me. I made the biggest mistake of my life, he admitted. I don't know how to fix it. You can't fix it, I answered gently. But you can face it. With your son. With yourself. I stood, slipping my purse over my shoulder. Take the envelope to your lawyer. You can fight me, or you can accept the terms and end this with dignity. That choice is yours. As I turned to leave, his voice followed me. You seem different, Easter. Stronger. I paused, meeting his eyes one last time. That's because I am. Losing everything has a way of showing you who you really are. I walked out of the restaurant into the crisp afternoon air, my steps steady, my pulse calm. For the first time in months, I felt free. And here's where I'll leave you with a promise. What happened after that meeting didn't just end a marriage, it detonated the carefully built lies that Jake had used to control his father. The fallout was bigger, louder, and more destructive than I could have ever imagined. Stay with me, because the twist is coming, and you will not believe how it all collapsed. The hours after that meeting were strangely quiet. I had expected Mark to call, to rage, to beg. But my phone stayed still on the nightstand. Instead, the silence told me what I already knew. He was going home to face Jake, and the weight of the truth would not be easy to carry. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. Through a mutual friend, I learned what happened that evening. Mark had returned, envelope in hand, his face grim. Jake was waiting, restless. His voice raised the moment his father walked through the door. "What did she tell you? She's lying. You can't believe her." But Mark, for the first time in months, didn't immediately defend him. Instead, he held up the evidence, the screenshots, the statements, the footage. And Jake cracked, his voice pitched higher, more frantic. He stumbled over his lies, growing reckless. In his desperation, he admitted too much. "So what if I made it up? She never belonged here anyway." That was the moment the facade shattered. The perfect son, the victim he had pretended to be, vanished in the face of his own confession. Mark was forced to confront not just his son's cruelty, but his own blindness. Years of excusing Jake's behavior, years of shielding him from consequences, had led to this. Neighbors heard the shouting. A glass was thrown. The night ended in silence, each of them retreating to separate rooms, the bond between them fractured beyond repair. I didn't celebrate when I heard. I didn't feel vindicated. What I felt was something closer to grief for the family I had tried to build, for the man I had once trusted, for the boy who could have been so much more, if only someone had held him accountable. The weeks that followed proved just how fragile their world had become. Jake's grades plummeted further. He was caught drinking at school. Then came the suspension, bullying another student online. The golden image Mark had clung to crumbled completely, leaving behind only the reality I had seen all along, a troubled teenager spiraling out of control. Meanwhile, my life began to take on a new shape. Patricia finalized the divorce paperwork. The settlement was fair. I received compensation for the renovations I had paid for the furniture, for the investments I had contributed to. Enough to buy a small apartment of my own. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. Every wall, every piece of furniture reflected me, not compromise. Work became my sanctuary. Freed from the constant turmoil at home, I poured myself into my projects. My focus sharpened, and within months, I earned a promotion to senior marketing director. Ironically, the very ambition I had muted during my marriage to avoid overshadowing Mark now flourished. I realized how much of myself I had silenced, and I promised never to dim again. Laurel moved closer, taking a job at a hospital nearby. Her presence anchored me. Sunday brunches with Sophia became a ritual, mimosas, laughter, and conversations that reminded me I was never truly alone. Therapy, too, became a lifeline. Dr. Carter helped me peel back the layers of gaslighting, reminding me that my worth had never been tied to Mark's belief in me, or Jake's acceptance. 6 months later, I hosted a housewarming party in my new apartment. Friends filled the room with chatter and warmth. Laurel raised her glass and said, "To new beginnings," and to my sister who showed us what it means to rise from the ashes. The clinking of glasses, the glow of candles, the sound of genuine laughter, it was everything my old life had lacked. But the story wasn't done yet. Because sometimes, closure comes in unexpected places. And in my case, it came in the form of an unexpected encounter, one that would force me to stand face to face with the man who had once thrown me away. Before I tell you about that moment, I want to ask, have you ever had someone betray you so deeply that you wondered if you could ever forgive them? Would you even want to? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear how you've carried your own scars, because healing never happens in isolation. The day I saw Mark again months later was the day I realized forgiveness isn't about them. It's about freeing yourself. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I saw him again. I hadn't planned it. In fact, I would have gone out of my way to avoid it if I'd known. But life has a strange way of forcing us to confront what we'd rather leave behind. I was standing in line at a coffee shop near my office, scrolling through emails, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Easter?" The single word froze me. I turned, and there he was, Mark. He looked older, somehow smaller. His once polished suits had given way to something rumpled. The confident posture I remembered had slouched into weariness. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said softly, almost hesitant. "Neither did I," I replied, my tone neutral. We stepped outside with our drinks, sitting at a small metal table beneath a canopy of orange leaves. The silence stretched, heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, he spoke. Jake moved out. His voice cracked on the words. He barely speaks to me. He says I ruined his life by confronting him about what he did to you. A wave of conflicting emotions hit me: sadness, vindication, anger, even pity. He ruined his own life, Mark. You just finally stopped protecting him. Mark nodded slowly, staring at his untouched coffee. I was blind. I see that now. I thought I was protecting my son, but all I did was enable him, and I lost the best thing I ever had in the process. His eyes lifted to mine, filled with regret. I lost you. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. There was a time when those words would have broken me, would have made me question everything, but now, they didn't hold the same power. You didn't lose me, Mark. You threw me away. And when someone shows you who they are, you believe them. He flinched at my words, but he didn't argue. Instead, he whispered, I'm sorry. For not believing you. For choosing him over you. For everything. The apology I had once begged for was finally here. But it felt strangely hollow. Too late, too distant. Like an echo in a room I no longer lived in. I don't hate you, I said finally. But I don't need you either. I've built something better without you. He swallowed hard, nodding. I can see that. You look stronger. I am, I said simply, because I had no choice but to be. We sat in silence again, the autumn air crisp around us. For the first time, I noticed how tired his eyes looked, how weighed down he seemed by the consequences of his own choices. And though part of me wanted to relish it, another part only felt relief that his burden was no longer mine to carry. When I stood to leave, he didn't stop me. He just whispered, Take care of yourself, Easter. I turned back once, meeting his gaze. I already am. Walking away, I realized that moment was not about him at all. It wasn't about his apology or his regret. It was about me standing tall, unbroken, untethered. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing what he had done. It was about releasing myself from the chains of his choices. And as I walked beneath the canopy of orange leaves, I felt lighter than I had in years. Because the truth was simple. My life had already moved on, and his chapter in it was closed. 6 months after that coffee shop encounter, I stood on the balcony of my apartment, watching the city lights shimmer like stars scattered across the ground. The air was cool, the night alive with distant sounds of laughter and traffic. But inside me there was stillness, a peace I once thought I'd never find again. My life was not the same, but that was the point. I had carved out a new identity, brick by brick, decision by decision. The woman who once bent herself into pieces to be loved now stood whole, unafraid to take up space. Work thrived. I had just returned from a conference in San Francisco, where I presented a marketing campaign that drew praise from industry leaders. The applause still echoed in my ears, not because it validated me, but because it reminded me I had always been capable. I had simply forgotten. My home, though smaller than the house I once lived in, was alive with warmth. Friends dropped by often, filling the rooms with chatter and joy. Laurel and Sophia had become pillars in my life, their laughter now woven into my everyday rhythm. And on quiet nights I filled the silence with music, candles, and the simple luxury of being at peace in my own space. Mark, from what I occasionally heard, continued to struggle. Jake had distanced himself completely, refusing to accept responsibility for his lies. Mark faced the fallout alone, a man grappling with the consequences of misplaced loyalty. I did not gloat. I did not linger in bitterness. I simply let go. Because his story was no longer mine. What surprised me most was not the freedom, but the clarity. I had learned that family is not defined by blood or marriage contracts. It is defined by loyalty, trust, and respect. And when those are absent, love becomes a cage instead of a refuge. I started volunteering at a community center for teens, kids on the edge, kids who reminded me of Jake but without the safety net of privilege. I saw in them what might have been possible if someone had stepped in earlier, offered structure instead of excuses. It became my mission to give them what I had wished for Jake, accountability paired with compassion. On the 1-year anniversary of leaving that house, I hosted a dinner in my apartment. Friends, colleagues, Laurel and Sophia all gathered around my table. As candles flickered and wineglasses clinked, I raised a toast. To endings that became beginnings. To scars that became strength. And to the freedom of choosing yourself. The room erupted with cheers, but in my heart, it was quiet, a whisper of gratitude for the journey that had carried me here. And now I turn to you. You've followed me through betrayal, lies, and heartbreak. You've seen me fall, and you've watched me rise again. So I'll ask you this. What story are you holding on to that no longer serves you? What weight are you carrying that it's time to put down? Share it with me in the comments, because your story matters too. And if this journey resonated with you, don't let it end here. Make sure to like, subscribe, and stay with me for the next story, one that will challenge, surprise, and maybe even heal you in ways you don't expect. Because if my life has taught me anything, it's this. Every ending hides the seed of a beginning, and the next chapter is always waiting, if only you're brave enough to turn the page. When I look back now, it feels almost like a story that happened to someone else. The tears, the late-night arguments, the hollow silence of being cast out, it all seems so far away, like a storm that finally passed. But the truth is, those moments shaped me. They forced me to choose, remain broken, or rise stronger. I chose to rise. There is something quietly powerful about waking up and knowing your life is finally your own. No lies to defend against, no cold stares across the dinner table, no fear of being erased. Just peace. Just freedom. Just the steady rhythm of a heart that no longer beats for someone else's approval. I walk through my days now with a lighter step. Morning coffee on my balcony feels like a small victory. Laughter with Laurel and Sophia tastes sweeter than any grand banquet ever did. Even the solitude is different, no longer heavy, but soothing, a reminder that I am whole on my own. And if there is one lesson I carry from it all, it is this. Love should never demand that you lose yourself. True family, true partnership, true belonging. These things honor who you are. They do not erase you. So to anyone listening who feels trapped, unseen, or doubted, know this. You are stronger than you believe. You can leave the storm behind. You can build a life that feels like sunlight after endless rain. Because I did. And if I can step into that light, so can you.